Imagine a little girl, her eyes full of dreams about school and play, suddenly forced to carry the burden of marriage. Isn't that nothing less than the murder of innocence? Many believe that child marriage is a problem far removed from Europe. But the truth is harsher. This poison still seeps through the alleys of Eastern Europe and migrant communities. Elena's true story exposes a bitter reality that even where laws exist, poverty, tradition, and patriarchal control can still enslave a young girl's body and soul. This is not just the struggle of one child. It is the reflection of a hidden crisis that continues to breathe behind the curtains of modern Europe. The downtime air in Eastern Europe carried a strange kind of heaviness. In a small Romanian ville girdled by bare trees and worsening houses, 14-time-old Elena sat still on the rustic bench outside her home. She was thin, her hair tied in a loose plait, her treatises resting on her stage. She had always pictured of getting a school teacher. She loved the idea of standing in front of a classroom, chalk in hand, explaining words and figures to children like her. But that dream was about to be stolen. Elena's parents were floundering. Her father worked sometimes in construction, but hadn't been paid duly in months. Her mama vended manual chuck and rubbish at the ville request, but it was slightly enough for survival. Poverty was not new to them, but lately it had come unsupportable. When a man doubly Elena's age came to her father with a marriage offer, offering a dowry and fiscal security, her parents saw it as a way out. The man, Mihai, 28 times old, was not cruel in appearance. He worked as a motorist in a near city and possessed a small apartment. To Elena's parents, this meant stability. To Elena, it meant the end of nonage. In the ville, whispers started to spread. Some neighbors allowed the marriage was a blessing, a tradition that was for generations. Others lowered, apprehensive that the law in Romania banned marriage under 18, but nothing spoke openly. Silence hung in the air, heavier than the snow clouds over. Elena herself was caught between fear and confusion. She had heard of girls from bordering townlets who had been married off youthful. Some had faded into municipalities and no way returned to visit. Others came back with children of their own, faces aged than their times. Whenever Elena asked her mama why she had to marry so youthful, the answer was always the same. We cannot feed you, my child. This way, you'll be safe. You'll have a home. But to Elena, it didn't feel like safety. It felt like a pen. School was the only place where she felt free. Her school teacher, Mrs. Popescu, noticed the change in her jest. The girl who formerly eagerly answered questions now sat in silence, gaping at the bottom. One autumn, Mrs. Popescu asked her gently, "Elena, are you all right?" The words nearly escaped Elena's mouth. She wanted to say, "They're marrying me off." But fear held her back. What if the school teacher told her parents? What if effects got worse? So she stayed quiet, forcing a smile, and said, "I'm fine." Meanwhile, the medications began. A date was chosen for a small form. Dresses were espoused. Cousins were informed. Every step brought Elena closer to the moment when her life would no longer belong to her. What nothing knew was that this story would not remain retired. In Europe, laws and systems was to cover children, but they only worked if someone was stalwart enough to speak up. And in Elena's case, the silence of her parents and neighbors would soon disaccord with the attention of the outside world. For now, however, she sat on that rustic bench, hugging her treatises as if they were her last guard against the storm that was coming. The days leading up to the marriage were heavy with implied words. Elena woke every morning to the sound of her mama bulging in the kitchen, humming songs that no longer carried warmth. Every evening her father would return with conversations about Mihai, the man she was supposed to marry, as though Elena were formerly his responsibility. The girl herself drifted through these days like a shadow. She went to academy, though she knew her time there was nearly over. She heeded as her classmates talked about examinations, schoolwork, and downtime carnivals. None of them knew that. Her non-age was being inked down. It was in this fragile routine that the first crack appeared. One autumn, as she dallied after class to gather her scrapbooks, her schoolteacher, Mrs. Popescu, noticed the faint greenishness in her eyes. "Elena," she said vocally, "you don't smile presently. Has commodity happed at home?" Elena sat. She could feel the words pressing against her throat, hopeless to escape. For a moment, she nearly confessed everything. But the memory of her mama's warning echoed in her mind. "This is for your own good. Don't bring shame to the family." Rather, she shook her head. "I'm just tired, miss." But preceptors aren't fluently wisecracked, especially those who had seen too numerous bright scholars evaporate from classrooms, their futures swallowed by poverty and forced marriages. That night, Mrs. Popescu couldn't sleep. She searched through old reports, reading about cases where youthful girls had been forced into unions under the disguise of tradition. Each time, the law had been clear under 18. No marriage was legal. And yet, in retired corners of Europe, the practice continued. The following week, Elena's absence from academy verified her worst fear. The girl's office was empty, her books untouched. When she asked other scholars, they rumored that Elena was preparing for her marriage. The news hit the schoolteacher like a blow to the casket. She knew she had a duty, not just as a preceptor, but as a protection. Preceptors in Romania, like away in the European Union, were fairly obliged to report suspected cases of child abuse or neglect. And in her eyes, forcing a 14-time-old girl into marriage was no lower than abuse. Still, she dithered. To report meant challenging the traditions of the Ville. It meant putting herself in conflict with Elena's family. But one image kept hanging her Elena's sad, silent face, clinging her treatises as if they were her lifeline. 2 days laterally, Mrs. Popescu made a decision. She communicated the Child Protection Services office in the nearest city. She described her pupil, her unforeseen pullout, and the rumors of marriage. The officer on the other end of the line heeded precisely, and assured her that a disquisition would be opened incontinently. Back in the Ville, Elena remained ignorant that her quiet suffering had sparked a chain of events. She was busy learning how to cook larger refections, how to bear politely in Mihai's company, and how to carry herself like a woman when, outside, she was still an alarmed child. Her parents, caught between fear of the law and despair for survival, pressed her harder. "Do not repel," her father told her one night. "You'll thank us latterly. Life is hard, and this man can give you further than we ever could." Elena didn't answer. Her silence was incorrect for obedience, but inside her, a storm was growing. Soon, that storm would collide with forces beyond her family's control, because once the state intervenes, silence is no longer an option. The first sanctioned step came still, nearly invisibly, like a ripple moving beneath the face of still water. Elena's Ville was used to silence. Secrets were guarded, traditions unquestioned. But in the nearest city, far from the muddy roads and worsening houses, a different world was one of services, case lines, and laws written to cover children. At the Child Protection Services office, Elena's case was entered into a train pronounced critical. The report from Mrs. Popescu was detailed a 14-time-old girl, visibly worried, absent from academy, brooded to be preparing for marriage. The officer handling the case, Inspector Andrei Petrescu, had seen too numerous analogous stories. Each one counted on him, because they frequently came too late, after the child was formally gone. Andrei believed in the system, but he also knew its limits. Pastoral townlets were tight, knit. Outlanders were unpleasant. Numerous times when officers arrived to probe, families would deny everything. Neighbors would cover each other. No marriage then, they would contend. Indeed, if the verity sat pulsing in a reverse room. Still, the law gave him authority. In Romania, like utmost of the European Union, marriage under 18 was banned without exception. However, it counted as abuse if parents were forcing it. And if the marriage had formerly been conducted in a religious or artistic form, it was invalid in the eyes of the state. 2 days after the report, Andre and a social worker named Elena set out for Elena's ville. The trip itself was a memorial of the gap between civic and pastoral life. Paved roads gave way to dirt tracks, streetlights faded, and ultramodern houses shrank into survived rustic homes. When they arrived, the ville sounded indifferent. Children played barefoot in the snow-dusted fields. Old women sat tattling by the roadside. Yet, as soon as the officers stepped out of their auto, silence spread. Everyone watched. Outlanders infrequently came then. And when they did, it was infrequently good news. Andre asked for directions to Elena's home. He was led to a small, sagging house at the edge of the ville. Elena's father, Ion, met them at the door. His eyes were suspicious, his tone guard. "We've had a report," Andre said, showing his emblem. "It concerns your son, Elena." Ion strengthened. "My son is fine. She's outside helping her mama." "We'd like to speak with her," Elena said gently. Inside, Elena sat at the kitchen table, shelling potatoes. Her hands set when she saw the non-natives. For the first time in weeks, she felt a flicker of commodity she hadn't dared imagine stopgap. The questions began simply. How old was she? Was she attending academy? Did she know anything about a marriage arrangement? Elena looked at her parents, who stood close behind the officers, their presence heavy and commanding. Fear choked her. She said nothing. Ion snappily cut in. "These are falsehoods. Townies gossip. We admire the law." Andre and Elena changed ganders. They had been then ahead. Children infrequently spoke openly with parents hard. That was why the law allowed private interviews. So they asked Ion and his woman to step outdoors. After a tense silence, the parents adhered. Now, alone with the officers, Elena's eyes filled with gashes. She rumored, slightly audible, They want me to marry a man. I don't want to." It was enough. Her words verified everything. Andre closed his tablet precisely. He knew what came next would not be easy. Removing a child from her family was one of the most delicate way in their work, frequently leading to wrathfulness, allegations, indeed pitfalls from the community. But the law was clear, and Elena had eventually broken her silence. That evening, while the ville rumored outdoors, officers made their decision. Elena would not remain in that house. Her life was about to change ever. The moment officers decided that Elena would not remain in her parents' home, the atmosphere in the ville shifted. Word traveled faster than steps, and by evening, nearly everyone knew the government had come to take a child down. Elena sat quietly in the aft seat of the Child Protection Service's auto, her small bag on her stage, filled precipitously with many clothes and treatises. Elena, the social worker, sat beside her, offering quiet consolation. "You're safe now," she rumored. But the word safe felt fragile, nearly fantastic, in the face of what was passing outdoors. Her parents hadn't accepted the decision still. Ion had argued until his voice was coarse, averring that the officers had no right to intrude in family matters. "She's our son," he cried. "We decide what's stylish for her." His woman wept loudly, criminating the outlanders of destroying their family's honor. Neighbors gathered in clusters, some seesawing in sympathy with the parents, others watching with guarded silence. In townlets like this, tradition frequently overbalanced law. The idea that a child could refuse marriage, that the state could intermediate, sounded nearly alien. As the auto pulled down, a group of men followed on bottom, their voices rising in wrathfulness. "Leave her then," one cried. "This is our way, not yours." Monuments rattled against the frozen ground, though none struck the auto. Irina kept her voice calm, telling Elena to look forward, not back. At the original Child Protection Office, Elena was taken to a small sanctum for minors. The structure was straight, but it had warmth, clean wastes, and food that didn't carry the weight of obligation. For the first time in months, Elena slept without hearing her parents brooding about dowries and marriages. Yet peace didn't last long. The veritably coming morning, Ion arrived at the office, demanding his son's return. He brought cousins, relatives, indeed the Ville clerk. They argued that the government was attacking their culture, disrespecting their faith, and destroying their family. The clerk, an altitudinous man with a heavy voice, stood before the officers and declared, "Marriage has always been the way for our people. To prohibit it's to tear piecemeal our community." Andre, the inspector, remained firm. "Marriage under 18 is illegal. It isn't tradition we oppose, but the exploitation of a child. Elena has the right to education, to non-age, to freedom from forced marriage." The clash wasn't only about Elena presently. It was about two worlds colliding: the old one, shaped by poverty and custom, and the ultramodern one, erected on mortal rights and law. For Elena's parents, the marriage was survival. For the state, it was abuse. Meanwhile, Elena herself scuffled with guilt. In the sanctum, she wondered if she had betrayed her parents. They were poor, hopeless, maybe deceived, but they hadn't abominated her. She allowed of her mama's gash-stained face, her father's wrathfulness. Did they truly believe they were saving her? Irina noticed her silence and sat with her one evening. "You aren't shamefaced," she told Elena gently. "Parents occasionally make choices out of fear. But you have the right to choose your own life. That isn't treason, that's freedom." Elena jounced, though the weight in her casket didn't lift fully. Freedom was still strange, nearly shocking. Back in the Ville, resentment coddled. Some neighbors spoke of filing desires, others of defying officers directly. For them, Elena's case wasn't just about one girl. It was about losing control over their way of life. What they didn't realize was that the story was formally moving beyond the Ville. Intelligencers had caught wind of the case. Soon, Elena's name, changed in the reports for her protection, would echo in journals and TV debates across the country. The private pain of one child was about to become a public question. The first composition appeared only 3 days after Elena was taken from her parents' home. A small original review published the story with the caption, "Authorities remove 14-time-old girl to help child marriage in rural village." The piece was conservative, using no names, but it was enough to enkindle debate. Within hours, larger media outlets picked it up. TV crews began driving toward the Ville, eager to retake the clash between tradition and law. By the end of the week, Elena's story wasn't just a Ville matter, it was a public caption. For Elena, sheltered in the child protection home, the attention felt fantastic. She had no way seen her name in print, no way imagined her quiet suffering would come public knowledge. The staff at the sanctum kept the journals down from her, but whispers reached her cognizance anyway. She was being called numerous effects victim, survivor, revolutionary, child bridegroom. Each marker felt heavy, none completely hers. In her Ville, the response was explosive. Some neighbors saw the case as a chance to expose the harsh, realities of poverty and forced marriages. Others indicted the media of exaggerating, of painting them as backward peasants adhering to outdated customs. Elena's parents felt lowered. For them, it wasn't just the loss of their son, it was the stain of public shame. TV crews canvassed townies on muddy roads, landing sound bites that fueled the fire. One old woman shook her head and said, "It has always been this way. My mama married at 15, my grandmother at 14. Who are they to tell us we're wrong?" Another townie, youngish and further open, combated, "Times are changing. Children need education, not chains. This is the 21st century." In Bucharest, politicians seized the story. Some used it to punctuate Romania's progress toward aligning with European Union norms, arguing that cases like Elena's proved the need for stronger enforcement of child protection laws. Others claimed the government was snooping too, roughly in family matters, assessing civic values on pastoral communities. Talk shows erupted with heated debates. Mortal rights activists called Elena's junking a necessary step, a symbol of stopgap for thousands of silent children trapped in analogous situations. Religious leaders, meanwhile, advised of eroding traditions, criminating the state of ignoring artistic identity. Amid the noise, one voice managed to cut through: Elena's schoolteacher, Mrs. Popescu. When the intelligencer asked her why she had reported the case, she answered simply, "Because she's a child, and children earn to be children." Those words struck a passion. They were replayed on TV, published in journals, participated across social media. Non-natives began transferring letters of support to Elena, though utmost no way reached her directly. Some called her stalwart, though she had slightly spoken. Others called her lucky, though she still felt lost. In the sanctum, Irina tried to shield Elena from the chaos. She explained precisely, "People are talking about you, yes, but they're also talking about what should change. Your story is helping others." Elena plotted to understand. How could her private pain belong to so numerous others? She hadn't chosen to be a symbol. She hadn't chosen to fight a battle between law and tradition. All she wanted was to sit in her classroom again, girdled by books and dreams of tutoring. But symbols are infrequently chosen. They're made by circumstance. And Elena, whether she liked it or not, had come one. The storm outside was growing, and soon it would reach courtrooms and congresses. But for Elena, the storm inside was stronger. The storm of being 14, torn between guilt for her family and the fragile pledge of freedom. The courthouse in the nearest megacity stood in stark discrepancy to Elena's small ville. Its gravestone walls and altitudinous windows gave an imprint of order, of rules sculpted in permanence. For Elena, who had now been inside such a structure, it felt inviting, like walking into another world. The case was officially registered under the title State versus Ion and Maria Ionescu, alleged forced marriage of a minor. Elena's parents sat stiffly on one side of the courtroom, their faces blenched but recalcitrant. Her father gripped his fists. Her mama twisted her hands in her stage. To them this was demotion beyond measure, not just being indicted of breaking the law, but being treated as culprits in front of non-natives. Elena, dressed in a simple sweater and skirt handed by the sanctum, sat beside Irina and a counsel appointed by the state. Her heart pounded so hard she allowed the sound would echo in the room. She wanted to evaporate, to be unnoticeable. Rather, she became the center of attention. The prosecutor spoke first. He laid out the data with a calm but firm voice. Elena was only 14 times old. Arrangements had been made for her to marry a man doubly her age. She had verified to child protection officers that she didn't want the marriage. He argued that this was a clear case of tried child marriage, an act interdicted under Romanian law and European mortal rights conventions. Elena's Father responded with wrathfulness. "We no way forced her," he cried. "We only wanted a better life for her. Poverty isn't a crime." His counsel tried to frame the situation else, arguing that no sanctioned marriage had yet taken place, only conversations. "My guests are being judged for intentions, not conduct," he said. "They're poor, uninstructed people trying to survive. Is it just to tear their family piecemeal?" The judge heeded patiently, but the law was clear indeed. Preparing or arranging a marriage for someone under 18 was illegal. Still, the defense pressed on, hoping sympathy would overweigh legitimacy. Also came the hardest moment. Elena herself was asked to swear. Her hands quivered as she stood, her small voice slightly audible in the silent room. The judge leaned forward. "Elena, do you wish to marry this man?" "No," she rumored. "Did your parents press you?" Her throat tensed. For a moment, she felt her mama's eyes burning into her back, soliciting for silence. But also she allowed of her academy, her books, her dream of tutoring, and she forced herself to say, louder this time, "Yes, they wanted me to. I do not want it." The words hung in the air like a blast. The courtroom erupted with murmurs. Her mama began to cry still, covering her face. Her father shook his head in unbelief, as though his son had betrayed him before the world. Irina placed a steadying hand on Elena's shoulder. For the first time, the girl felt commodity stronger than fear-relief. She had spoken the verity. The judge suspended the session, stating that farther sounds would determine guardianship arrangements and implicit charges. But one thing was clear: Elena would not return home. Not now, not until her safety was guaranteed. Outside, intelligencers awaited, cameras flashing as the families exited independently. Journalists cried questions. "Do you lament it? Do you suppose this is fair? What will be coming?" Elena was shielded from the chaos, attended snappily into a staying auto. But the noise followed her, the noise of a nation now invested in her fate. The battle was no longer just about one child. It had come a test of whether the law could truly cover the most vulnerable, indeed against the weight of tradition and family ties. And the fight was far from over. The weeks after the first court hail were the hardest Elena had ever known. She lived in the sanctum now, girdled by other children whose stories were different but pronounced by the same theme: broken homes, neglect, abuse, abandonment. Some were noisy, filling the hallways with horseloft to hide their pain. Others were silent, lost in worlds of their own. Elena fell into the alternate group. Every night she lay awake, gaping at the ceiling, hearkening to the muffled sounds of the megacity outdoors. She allowed of her ville, the rustic bench by her house, the sound of cravens in the yard, her mama's chuck baking in the roaster. She missed it, indeed, though it was the place where her non-age had nearly been stolen. The recollections of home were tangled love and fear, bound together so tightly she couldn't separate them. The guilt eroded at her. She had spoken the verity in court, yes, but in doing so she had lowered her parents in front of the entire country. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw her father's face twisted with wrathfulness and treason. She heard her mama's heartbreaks. What kind of son gashes her family piecemeal? Irina noticed the change. The lively spark that had flitted when Elena first arrived was darkening. One evening she sat beside Elena on the bed. "You're quiet again," Irina said vocally. Elena signed. "Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I should have just gone with it." Irina's heart pained. "Hear to me, Elena. You're 14. 14. Marriage at your age isn't love. It's captivity. You didn't destroy your family. Poverty and fear did that long before you." But the words slid over Elena like water. Deep outside, the weight remained. Meanwhile, the outside pressure boosted. In the Ville, her parents fought back. They gave interviews, claiming the state had abducted their son. Sympathizers gathered around them, averring tradition was being criminalized. The government wants to abolish who we are, one man cried at a rally. The media, empty for drama, amplified both sides. On TV, images of Elena's gash-barred face appeared beside footage of her angry father. She was painted as both victim and villain, the child saved, the child betrayer. The pressure came unsupportable. At the sanctum, Elena stopped eating. Duly. She stopped talking to the other children. At academy, because she had been enrolled again in a temporary program, she sat quietly at her office, her mind far down. Her preceptors honored the signs of depression. One night, after yet another agony where she saw herself trapped in a marriage dress she couldn't take off, Elena broke down fully. She coiled up in bed, blubbing into the pillow until her body shook with prostration. When Irina set up her, she clung to her like a drowning child. "I just want it to stop," Elena rumored. "All of it. The fighting, the shouting, the journalists. I just want to be normal." Irina held her tightly. "It'll stop. Not moment, not hereafter. But it will. And you'll have a life. You'll go to academy. You'll have choices. I promise you." Promises were fragile effects. Elena wasn't sure if she believed them. But that night, for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the walls of the sanctum. A classroom, a mound of books. Her hand raised to answer a question, not to subscribe down her freedom. It was a fragile stopgap, fluently broken, but it was stopgap nevertheless. What Elena did not know was that the fight outside was reaching its climax. The coming court session would not just decide her guardianship, it would set a precedent for the entire country, and all eyes were on her. The alternate court hail felt different from the first. The room was fuller, charged with pressure. Intelligencers crowded the benches, pens ready, cameras flashing whenever the judge entered. Activists filled the gallery, holding silent signs that read, "Children aren't misters." The case of Elena had grown into a symbol, and everyone knew the outgrowth would echo far beyond one Ville. Elena sat near the front, her shoulders hunkered, her hands gripping the fabric of her skirt. Irina rumored gentle solace, but Elena's heart contended. She had been through so important formerly. Journalists, interviews, whispers in the sanctum, agonies at night. This felt like the final test. On the contrary side, her parents sat strictly. Ion, her father, looked exhausted yet stubborn, as though he carried the weight of a battle he refused to lose. Her mama's eyes were swollen from gashes, her hands folded tightly in prayer. Around them sat cousins and neighbors who had traveled from the Ville, glaring at officers as if their veritably presence was in personality. The judge began by reviewing the substantiation, evidence from Elena declaring she didn't want marriage, reports from Child Protection Services detailing her parents' arrangement with Mihai, the aged man, statements from preceptors attesting Elena's unforeseen pullout and emotional decline. The law was clear: marriage under 18 was unpermitted, yet the judge conceded this was further than a simple violation of enactment. It was about the clash between tradition and mortal rights. The defense formally again tried to argue culture and poverty. Elena's father rose, voice pulsing with wrathfulness. "We're poor people. We wanted security for our son. You treat us like culprits when all we wanted was survival. Who feeds her now? Who protects her now? The state?" The prosecutor responded sprucely. "Survival doesn't mean immolation of a child. Poverty cannot be answered by dealing away a son's future. The law exists for exactly this reason, to cover the most vulnerable when indeed their families cannot." The room fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Eventually the words came. Elena would remain under state protection until the age of 18, or until a safe arrangement with cousins could be made. Her parents were set up shamefaced of tried forced marriage of a minor, but rather of captivity. They would face a combination of forfeitures, obligatory maternal education programs, and community service. Most importantly, any unborn attempt to arrange marriage for Elena would be considered a felonious act, punishable by imprisonment. The decision struck like a hammer. Activists in the gallery exhaled in relief. Intelligencers scribbled furiously. Elena's parents sagged in defeat, her mama breaking into heartbreaks, her father shaking his head as though betrayed by the world. Elena herself felt a strange admixture of feelings. Relief, yes, but also grief. She had won her freedom, yet lost her family in the process. As the courtroom voided, she stayed seated, numb. Freedom was no way as simple as she had imagined. Outside, microphones awaited. Journalists cried questions. Elena, how do you feel? Do you suppose justice was done? What do you want for your future? But Elena said, nothing. She was attended snappily into the sanctum's auto, shielded from the noise. She pressed her forepart to the glass, watching the megacity blur history. For the first time in months, the decision was made. She'd not be married off. She'd go back to academy. Yet inside, she asked herself the question no verdict could answer. At what cost? Because in winning her freedom, she had lost the home she formerly knew. And that crack, deeper than any law could heal, would take times to mend. Life after the verdict was a puck tale. Freedom didn't abolish fear overnight, nor did it heal the injuries of a broken family. For Elena, the weeks following the court's decision felt like walking across thin ice, each step fragile, uncertain, and echoing with cracks beneath her bases. The sanctum tried to produce stability. She was enrolled in an original academy, placed in classes with children her age. The preceptors were kind, frequently giving her redundant time with assignments, knowing her mind carried heavier burdens than utmost. Some classmates were curious and rumored about her when they allowed she couldn't hear. Others were kinder, inviting her to sit with them at lunch, though Elena frequently kept to herself. Books came her escape. She buried herself in reading, turning runner after runner with a hunger that surprised indeed her. Novels carried her to worlds where children had choices, where struggles ended in triumph. Schoolwork, however delicate, gave her a sense of control she had never felt before. Still, the nights were hard. Dreams of her marriage dress, white, suffocating, insolvable to remove, visited her. Occasionally she woke up crying, brooding justifications to her mama in the dark. Guilt was a constant shadow. She wondered if her parents abominated her now, if they sat in their small house cursing her name. Letters weren't allowed at first, but latterly, when limited supervised contact was permitted, the words she entered were filled with bitterness. You have lowered us. You chose non-natives over family. Elena folded the letters precisely, hiding them at the bottom of her hole. She couldn't throw them down, because they were still her parents, but she couldn't bear to read them doubly. Irina, ever vigilant, encouraged her to see a therapist. At first, Elena defied. Talking about her pain felt dangerous, like picking at an old crack that had slightly begun to scar. But gradationally, she opened up. She spoke about the pressure of tradition, the guilt of defying her parents, and the strange emptiness that came with freedom. Her therapist told her commodities she'd now forget. Survivors frequently carry guilt for choosing life. But survival isn't treason, it's courage. Meanwhile, the world outside moved on. Media attention shifted to other dishonors, other captions. Activists continued to cite Elena's case in conferences and policy debates, but for utmost people, she came just another story in the endless cycle of news. In her ville, still, the story didn't fade so fluently. Her parents lived under the weight of judgment. Some neighbors ached them, others scouted them. The family's character had been fractured, and Elena knew conciliation would not come, snappily, if ever. But in the sanctum, commodity unanticipated began to be. Youngish girls who heard about her case started looking at Elena else. They rumored to her, asking skittish questions. Is it true you said no? Is it true they heeded to you? For the first time, Elena realized that her story carried power. Not in the journals, not in the courtrooms, but then, among children like herself. She had shown them it was possible to repel, indeed, if it came with pain. One autumn, while helping another girl with schoolwork, Elena caught herself smiling. A small, genuine smile. It startled her. Hope had returned, still, like a shy guest knocking on the door of her heart. Freedom, she realized, wasn't just about escaping marriage. It was about erecting commodity new from the pieces left before. And though the path ahead was long and uncertain, she was beginning to see it, step by step, book by book, assignment by assignment. Times passed. The girl who formerly sat pulsing on a rustic bench, clinging her treatises like a guard, was no longer a child. Elena grew steadily in the sanctum system, also in foster care, supported by social workers and preceptors who believed in her eventuality. Life was not easy. There were moments of loneliness, moments when recollections of her parents cut deeply. But she refused to let the murk of her once define her future. Education came her anchor. She studied hard, pouring her heart into every assignment. By 16, she was winning small academic awards. By 18, she graduated secondary academy with marks that surprised indeed herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to dream without fear of those dreams being stolen. At university, she chose to study social work and child protection. Numerous of her classmates came from stable homes, carrying stories lighter than hers, but Elena carried a story that gave her strength. She knew what it meant to be speechless, to be silenced by tradition and fear. She also knew the difference it made when one school teacher, one social worker, one judge refused to look down. In lectures, she heeded hardly. In fieldwork, she gave further than needed. Professors noted her quiet determination, her empathy that sounded to run deeper than utmost. They didn't know that every child she met reminded her of herself, that alarmed 14-time-old girl who formerly allowed survival was treason. Her parents remained distant. Contact was minimum, strained by bitterness and shame. Yet Elena carried no abomination. With time, she came to understand that their choices had been born from fear and poverty, not atrocity. Still, remission didn't mean returning. She had to walk her own path, indeed, if it meant walking without them. By her mid-20s, Elena had begun working with associations across Romania, helping identify and cover children at threat of forced marriage or exploitation. She visited pastoral seminaries, speaking vocally but forcefully to girls who allowed they had no choice. I was formerly like you, she told them. I allowed silence was safer, but silence steals your life. You have the right to say no. You have the right to choose. Some heeded with wide eyes, their futures shifting with every word. Others were hysterical, not ready yet. Elena no way pushed too hard. She knew change came sluggishly, like dawn breaking over dark hills. Her story, once a caption, had come a living force. Policymakers cited her case when strengthening child protection laws. Activists used her illustration to argue against artistic practices that risked minors. And though Elena no way sought fame, her name came still admired in the circles. That signified. Late one evening, Walking home from a meeting, Elena broke outside a academy. Through the window she saw children laughing, raising their hands to answer questions. A surge of emotion surged through her. Nostalgia, anguish, pride. She had wanted to be a school teacher formerly, long agone. In some ways, she realized she formerly was. Not in classrooms filled with chalk and blackboards, but in the world itself, tutoring through her survival, her adaptability, her voice. For the first time and numerous times, she allowed herself to imagine the future not as a battle, but as a oil. She allowed of graduate studies, maybe indeed writing a book. She allowed of one day erecting her own family, not through fear, not through arrangement, but through love freely chosen. Standing there in the quiet evening, Elena smiled. Her life had formerly been written for her, in secretiveness and silence. Now she was holding the pen, and, this time, the story was hers to write.